Welcome to the Olive Grove podcast.
Great to be here.
You know how this works. You send us interesting sources, and we really dig into them to pull out the key insights.
Yeah, it's like getting the Cliff Notes, but, deeper.
Exactly. Trying to help you get well-informed without all the heavy lifting. So today, we're looking at a source a listener sent about 1 Thessalonians chapter 2. It's from the MCS 1 Thessalonians chapter 2 website.
Right. And our mission for this deep dive.
Well, we want to understand what really motivated the early Christian ministry, their methods, especially looking at the Apostle Paul as our example here.
Okay, sounds good. Where do we start?
The source actually kicks off by drawing this interesting parallel. It talks about how God examines our hearts and how this chapter kind of lets us look at Paul's heart for ministry.
That sets a reflective tone right away, doesn't it? Thinking about why he did what he did.
Totally. And Paul, he dives right in. Verse 1, 1 Thessalonians 2.1, he says, "You yourselves know, brothers, that our visit to you was not fruitless."
And fruitless here isn't just like saying it wasn't pointless. The source clarifies it means tangible results, real actions happening because of their visit.
Yeah, not just people nodding along intellectually. It had to make a difference.
And the source connects that to James, faith in action. It had to be lived out.
That's a really practical focus.
Absolutely. It wasn't just abstract philosophy. It was meant to change lives visibly.
So maybe something for you listening to think about. What's the tangible fruit in your own life beyond just, understanding concepts?
Good question.
Then we hit verse 2. Paul reminds them about Philippi.
Oof. Yeah, that wasn't easy. Being stripped, beaten, jailed, all for casting out a demon, like Acts 16 tells us.
Right. And the source uses a word linked to agony to describe that opposition. But here's the thing. Despite that agony, Paul and Silas just kept going. They boldly proclaimed the message in Thessalonica.
That level of courage is pretty astounding, isn't it? Facing that kind of great pressure, as the text says, and still speaking out shows real conviction.
Deep trust, for sure. Which leads us nicely into verse 3, talking about their motives.
The source points out their appeal, their whole ministry. It wasn't based on some mistake or error. It came from really knowing the gospel.
And crucially, not from impure motives. No hidden agendas like chasing money or fame.
Yeah, that's so important. The source draws a line between making genuine disciples, followers, and just, racking up numbers with tricks or gimmicks.
It wasn't about making friends and influencing people in that shallow way.
Exactly. It was about the truth of the message.
Which ties into verse 4. They spoke not to win favor with people, but with God, who tests our hearts.
Paul felt this huge responsibility, didn't he? Like God had personally entrusted him with the good news.
So pleasing God was the goal, not people.
Which is a big contrast to maybe watering down the message just to be liked or, get support. Paul wasn't budging on the word, even the hard parts.
Then verses 5 and 6 kind of hammer this home. No flattering talk, no manipulation driven by greed.
And Paul says God himself is witness to their sincerity.
Yeah. And the source includes that story, that anecdote about the elder.
Oh, right. The one visiting people, mainly hoping to get more money for the church.
Yeah, it really highlights the difference, doesn't it? Paul's team wasn't seeking human praise, not from the Thessalonians, not from anyone.
That story makes it really concrete, the kind of thing they were actively avoiding. Their validation came from God, not applause.
Then you get to verse 7, and there's this shift. Even with their authority as emissaries of the Messiah, they were gentle.
Like a nursing mother caring for her children. It's a powerful image.
It shows that balance, right? Courage and boldness, but also gentleness and care.
Exactly. The source contrasts. Well, you can't just have truth without love, or love that compromises truth. They held both together.
Truth and love. Okay. Verse 8 then says they shared not just the gospel, but their actual lives with them.
That's deep. It wasn't just preaching from a distance. It was living life alongside people, showing their faith in action.
Real connection.
And the source makes that interesting point about modern tendencies, sometimes expecting people to clean themselves up before they come, rather than going out to where people are.
Yeah, meeting people where they're at. Paul did that. And verse 9 adds another layer, their toil and hardship.
Working night and day.
Right, specifically so they wouldn't be a financial burden while sharing the message.
Yeah, well, it's quite different from a lot of modern church structures with paid staff, isn't it? Makes you think.
It definitely raises questions about individual responsibility versus relying on paid ministers for everything.
Paul's model put a lot of emphasis on everyone playing a part, it seems.
Which kind of flows into verse 10. Their behavior, holy, righteous, and blameless, was itself a witness. They practiced what they preached.
And that inspired the believers, the power of example.
Which, as the source notes, is still a huge issue today, right? When leaders don't live according to the message they preach.
Absolutely. It undermines everything. Paul's life backed up his words.
Then in verses 11 and 12, the tone shifts again, more personal, like a father.
Yeah, encouraging, comforting, urging them, appealing to them to live lives worthy of God's calling.
The source mentions that key fatherly duty, training children in the ways of the Lord.
So it wasn't just information transfer, it was deep personal investment in their spiritual growth, guiding them.
And then verse 13, this feels really central, Paul's gratitude.
Because they accepted the message not as just Paul's ideas.
But as the actual word of God.
Right. Paul saw himself purely as a messenger, delivering God's message, not making up his own stuff to be popular.
He wasn't trying to be innovative. He was trying to be faithful to the source.
Which underscores the authority of the message itself in their ministry.
Then verse 14 touches on suffering again, but this time the Thessalonian suffering.
Yeah, he draws that parallel to the persecution the churches faced back in Judea.
It's a reminder, like Jesus taught, that servants aren't greater than their master. Opposition is kind of expected, sadly.
Yeah, it normalizes it a bit, maybe fosters solidarity. You're not alone in this.
Verses 15 and 16 get pretty intense, describing the opposition from those who rejected Jesus.
And how they actively tried to stop the gospel from spreading to the Gentiles.
Paul saw that as a really serious sin, the source says, with consequences.
It highlights the spiritual battle, doesn't it? It wasn't just disagreement, it was active hostility.
Definitely. Then in 17 and 18, Paul expresses this real longing to go back. He tried multiple times.
But he felt the adversary, Satan, blocked him.
It's interesting how the source brings in that idea of, like, God's sovereignty even with Satan's temporary influence, kind of like the book of Job.
Right. Acknowledging spiritual opposition exists, but ultimately God is still in control. Satan operates within limits.
Okay, so finally, verses 19 and 20. This is the payoff, isn't it?
The ultimate reward. Paul says the people they reached, they will be his hope, joy, and crown when Jesus returns.
Wow. That connects everything back to eternity.
Exactly. The source links it to Matthew 6, storing treasures in heaven. The real lasting value is in people, in sharing the gospel.
That puts all the hardship and opposition in perspective.
It really does. Their motivation wasn't earthly reward, but that internal joy.
That's powerful stuff. Okay, before we wrap this part up, we wanted to pause for a second. We've been talking about connection and living things out.
Yeah, and on that note, we'd really encourage you to check out the My Christian Space online community. It's a great place to connect with others, talk about things like this chapter, and, support each other.
Definitely worth looking into. And speaking of support and practical action, like Paul's example, we want to mention Enduring Freedom Ministries.
They do fantastic work. Their goal is pretty straightforward, but makes a huge difference. Provide a hot meal, groceries, clothes, even a haircut and laundry services for someone in need.
And believe it or not, it costs just $4 a month to cover all that for one person. $4.
It's incredibly impactful. If you're in a position to help, please consider donating just that small amount monthly. It genuinely changes things for people.
Every bit helps support that vital, practical care. Okay, back to wrapping up our look at 1 Thessalonians 2.
Phew, quite a chapter.
Absolutely. So that brings us near the end of this deep dive for today. Hopefully this walkthrough has given you a clearer picture of Paul's heart and methods in ministry.
It's really striking just how consistent he was, that deep commitment. His example, it's still challenging, still inspiring today, not just for pastors, but for anyone trying to live their faith authentically.
For sure. And if you want to explore more like this with us, please subscribe to the Olive Grove podcast on YouTube.
And don't forget the My Christian Space website. You can often get early access to these deep dives there, plus other content.
Definitely check that out. So maybe a final thought to leave you with.
Yeah, as you go about your week, maybe reflect a little on what really motivates your actions.
Yeah.
How do your motivations line up with these principles we saw in Paul?
How might this early church model maybe challenge or inspire your own approach to faith and how you engage with people around you?
It's definitely something worth thinking about.